Samuel Whitehorse's weathered hands froze mid-cast as the desperate splashing echoed across Madison River. His fishing line dangled forgotten in the current while his 67-year-old eyes locked onto something that shouldn't exist. A black bear cub was drowning 50 yards downstream, trapped beneath fallen timber with only its star-marked chest visible above the churning water. The animal's terrified cries pierced the August afternoon silence like nothing Samuel had heard since Eleanor's final breath 3 years ago. Without hesitation, the retired ranger dropped his rod and plunged into the icy current, his arthritic joints screaming in protest. Behind him, his tackle box crashed onto the rocky shore, spilling decades of memories across the stones. This wasn't just any rescue. Samuel's trembling hands recognized something impossible in the cub's intelligent amber eyes, something that would later make wildlife experts question everything they thought they knew about animal consciousness. "Hold on, little one," he gasped, fighting the current that threatened to claim them both. "I'm coming." What happened next would leave everyone speechless. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching. From now, let's continue with the story. 3 years earlier, Samuel Whitehorse had been a different man. At 64, he commanded respect as Yellowstone's most experienced ranger, a third-generation Cherokee American whose weathered face and gentle wisdom made him a legend among visitors and wildlife alike. His wife, Eleanor, a brilliant botanist and licensed wildlife rehabilitator, had turned their rustic cabin into an unofficial sanctuary where injured animals found healing and hope. Then, pancreatic cancer stole Eleanor away in 18 brutal months, leaving Samuel drowning in medical bills that consumed their life savings. The experimental treatments, the desperate trips to specialists, the final weeks in hospice, everything cost money they didn't have. Now, at 67, Samuel survived on a meager pension of $1,847 monthly, while property taxes devoured what remained of their nest egg. The silence in their hand-built cabin had become unbearable. Every morning, Samuel still set 2 plates for breakfast, muscle memory refusing to accept Eleanor's absence. He spoke to her photograph on the mantel, sharing his daily observations about the changing seasons, the migrating elk, the political circus on television. Her botanical garden had surrendered to weeds, though her solar panels continued faithfully powering the old radio that randomly captured distant country stations. Samuel's hands trembled more frequently now, arthritis claiming joints that once handled injured bears with surgeon-like precision. His memory played cruel tricks, finding himself at Eleanor's grave without remembering the drive there, standing in the kitchen holding her coffee mug while tears traced familiar paths down his weathered cheeks. The doctors would call it early-stage dementia if he could afford their consultations. Friends had stopped calling after the first year. His few remaining colleagues from the Park Service lived scattered across the country, busy with their own grandchildren and retirement adventures. Samuel's world had shrunk to the 2-mile radius around his cabin, where Eleanor's ghost seemed strongest and the loneliness felt almost manageable. Financial desperation gnawed constantly. Medical collection agencies called twice weekly, threatening foreclosure on the property where he and Eleanor had spent 35 happy years. The cabin represented everything they'd built together. Every board carefully selected, every window positioned to capture Eleanor's beloved mountain views, every room filled with memories of their love story. At night, when the silence grew overwhelming, Samuel would tune Eleanor's radio to stations that played the old country songs she'd hummed while working in her garden. Sometimes, in the static between frequencies, he swore he could hear her voice offering gentle corrections to his cooking attempts or reminding him to take his blood pressure medication. This morning, like every morning for the past 3 years, Samuel had awakened asking the same haunting question that followed him through each empty day. What's the point of waking up anymore? The fishing rod in his truck represented his only remaining connection to joy. Eleanor had taught him to read water like scripture, finding trout in impossible places through patience and understanding. He never imagined that today, everything would change forever. The Madison River ran clearer than usual this August afternoon, its surface reflecting the cloudless Wyoming sky like polished glass. Samuel had chosen Eleanor's favorite fishing spot, a gentle bend where she'd once photographed a family of otters playing in the shallows. The memory stung, but it also comforted him in ways he couldn't explain to the empty cabin walls. He'd been casting for nearly an hour when the desperate splashing shattered the peaceful silence. At first, Samuel thought it might be a beaver slapping its tail, but the sound carried a frantic quality that made his ranger instincts surge to life. Following the noise downstream, he discovered a sight that stopped his heart. A black bear cub, no more than 6 months old, thrashed helplessly against a maze of fallen timber that had created a natural trap. The recent summer storms had toppled several dead trees across the river, forming a dam that caught debris, and apparently one terrified animal. Only the cub's head and distinctive white chest patch remained above the churning water, a star-shaped marking that made the little bear unmistakable even from 50 yards away. The cub's cries pierced Samuel's soul like nothing he'd experienced since Eleanor's final days. Those same desperate, helpless sounds that no living creature should ever have to make. His weathered hands began to shake, but not from arthritis this time, from recognition of pure, innocent suffering. "Eleanor would never forgive me if I walked away," Samuel whispered to himself, the words becoming a mantra as he assessed the dangerous situation. The water ran deep here, nearly 6 feet in the center, with a current strong enough to knock down a man half his age. His arthritis flared in both knees, a reminder that his body hadn't been tested like this in years. But the cub's increasingly weak struggles made the decision for him. Samuel kicked off his boots and waded into the freezing mountain water, gasping as the cold shocked his system. Each step forward became more treacherous as loose rocks shifted beneath his feet and the current tugged at his legs with surprising force. "Easy now, little one," he called softly, remembering Eleanor's gentle approach to frightened animals. "I'm coming to help you." The cub's dark eyes locked onto Samuel's face with an intelligence that seemed impossible for such a young animal. Instead of panicking further, the bear actually quieted, as if recognizing a potential savior in the approaching human. This unusual response should have surprised Samuel, but his focus remained fixed on the rescue. Reaching the timber dam required careful navigation through submerged branches that threatened to entangle his legs. Samuel's chest burned as the cold water reached his ribs, and his heart hammered against his ribcage with dangerous intensity. For a moment he wondered if this impulsive rescue would kill them both. Using a sturdy branch as leverage, Samuel worked methodically to create an escape route. The cub had wedged itself so tightly between 2 logs that freeing it required dismantling part of the natural dam. His fingers, numb from the cold, struggled with the slippery wood, while the current fought his every movement. "Just like Eleanor taught me," he muttered, remembering his wife's patient approach to wildlife rehabilitation. "Slow and steady. Don't rush. Don't frighten them more than they already are." 20 minutes passed before Samuel managed to shift the key log that held the cub prisoner. The moment it moved, the little bear shot forward into Samuel's waiting arms, nearly knocking him underwater with its desperate lunge for safety. The animal's weight, perhaps 40 pounds of soaked fur and muscle, tested Samuel's remaining strength as he fought to maintain his footing in the treacherous current. Carrying the exhausted cub to shore proved almost as challenging as the rescue itself. The bear had gone completely limp, whether from hypothermia or shock, Samuel couldn't determine. Its breathing seemed shallow, labored, and its normally dark fur had taken on a grayish tinge that worried the experienced outdoorsman. Once on dry ground, Samuel's training kicked in. He quickly examined the cub for injuries, discovering a partially healed bullet graze along its left shoulder, a wound perhaps 2 weeks old that had become infected. The sight of deliberate human cruelty against this innocent creature ignited a fury in Samuel's chest that he hadn't felt since Eleanor's diagnosis. "Who would shoot a baby?" he asked the unconscious cub, his voice breaking with emotion. "What kind of monster hurts something so helpless?" The bear's condition demanded immediate attention. Hypothermia, infection, and possible internal injuries from its struggle in the timber created a medical emergency that couldn't wait for Park Service protocols. Samuel faced a choice that would define the next chapter of his life: follow regulations and call for official help that might arrive too late, or take the law into his own hands and provide the care this animal desperately needed. Looking into the cub's half-closed eyes, Samuel made his decision. "Just for one night," he promised, gathering the limp form into his arms. "Just until you're strong enough to survive on your own." The drive home felt like the longest 2 miles of Samuel's life. The unconscious cub lay wrapped in his fishing jacket on the passenger seat, its labored breathing the only sound besides the truck's rattling engine. Every few seconds, Samuel glanced over to check for signs of life, his heart clenching each time the small chest rose and fell with obvious effort. At the cabin, Samuel carried the limp form directly to Eleanor's old rehabilitation room, a converted bedroom she'd used for injured wildlife during their decades together. The familiar smell of antiseptic and old blankets brought back a flood of memories. Eleanor's gentle hands cleaning wounds, her soft voice calming terrified animals, her patient dedication to creatures that others had given up on. "What would you do, honey?" Samuel whispered to the empty room, laying the cub on Eleanor's examination table. The answer came as clearly as if she were standing beside him. "Save this baby, no matter what it takes." The first night tested every ounce of Samuel's determination. The cub refused water, food, even the honey Eleanor had sworn by for traumatized animals. It huddled in the corner of the room, shivering uncontrollably despite the warm blankets Samuel had piled around its small form. The infected bullet wound wept constantly, requiring cleaning every few hours to prevent sepsis. Around midnight, as Samuel dozed fitfully in Eleanor's old rocking chair, the cabin's radio crackled to life with one of her favorite songs, a gentle country ballad about lost love and second chances. The coincidence felt too perfect to ignore, and Samuel found himself humming along in the darkened room. To his amazement, the cub's ears perked up at the sound. For the first time since the rescue, those intelligent, dark eyes focused on Samuel's face with something resembling curiosity rather than fear. Encouraged, Samuel began to sing softly in Cherokee, the same lullaby his grandmother had sung to him as a child, the one Eleanor had loved to hear during their quiet evenings together. The transformation was immediate and remarkable. The cub's shivering subsided, and it cautiously approached Samuel's outstretched hand. When it finally accepted a few drops of water from his cupped palm, Samuel felt tears streaming down his weathered cheeks, the first tears of joy he'd shed since Eleanor's funeral. "That's it, little one," he whispered. "You're going to be okay. We both are." By the third day, the cub had accepted the name Samuel gave it, Dakota, meaning friend in the Lakota language. The choice felt appropriate for an animal that had already begun to fill the crushing silence that had dominated Samuel's life for 3 years. Dakota's presence gave him a reason to wake up each morning, a purpose beyond merely surviving another day of loneliness. The bear's intelligence quickly became apparent in ways that would have fascinated Eleanor's scientific mind. Dakota learned to open cabinet doors by watching Samuel demonstrate the motion just twice. When Samuel installed a doggy door to allow outdoor access, the cub mastered its use within hours. Most remarkably, Dakota began responding to simple hand signals for come, stay, and no, behaviors that typically took months to develop in much older bears. But it was on the seventh day that Samuel made the discovery that would haunt him for months to come. Dakota had grown restless that morning, pacing near the door and making soft, whimpering sounds. When Samuel finally followed the cub into the forest, Dakota led him with purposeful determination through nearly 2 miles of wilderness to a small clearing beside Cascade Creek. There, partially hidden beneath fallen branches and decomposing leaves, lay the remains of Dakota's mother. The sight hit Samuel like a physical blow, a magnificent female black bear, probably 4 or 5 years old, with 3 bullet holes clearly visible in her skull. Professional hunting equipment lay scattered nearby, a high-powered rifle scope, spent cartridges, even a GPS device that someone had apparently dropped during a hasty retreat. Samuel knelt beside the bear's remains, his hands shaking with rage as he examined the evidence of deliberate, cold-blooded murder. This hadn't been a defensive shooting or even illegal hunting for meat. Someone had executed this mother bear with clinical precision, probably while she tried to protect her cub. The thought of Dakota witnessing his mother's death filled Samuel with a fury he hadn't experienced since watching cancer ravage Eleanor's body. "What kind of monster does this?" he asked the silent forest. "What kind of coward kills a mother protecting her baby?" Looking at Dakota, who sat quietly beside his mother's grave with an expression of unmistakable grief, Samuel made a decision that would define everything that followed. He wouldn't report this crime to the authorities, the bureaucracy, the investigations, the inevitable removal of Dakota to a facility somewhere. None of that would bring justice for this murdered mother or healing for her orphaned child. Instead, Samuel spent the afternoon digging a proper grave, burying the remains with the same care he'd have shown a human victim. Dakota watched every movement, occasionally approaching to sniff the disturbed earth before retreating to a respectful distance. When Samuel finally finished, the cub approached the fresh grave and gently placed a perfect white stone on the mound, a gesture so human-like it sent chills down Samuel's spine. Walking home through the gathering dusk, Samuel felt the weight of his decision settling around him like a heavy cloak. He was now harboring what authorities would consider an illegal animal, covering up evidence of a serious crime and potentially endangering both himself and Dakota by keeping silent. But looking down at the cub, walking trustingly beside him, Samuel knew he'd made the only choice his conscience would allow. That evening, as they sat together on the cabin's front porch, watching stars emerge in the clear mountain sky, Samuel felt something he hadn't experienced in 3 years. Contentment. Not happiness exactly, but a sense of purpose that filled the empty spaces in his soul. Dakota curled up against his leg, the bear's rhythmic breathing creating a peaceful soundtrack to the night sounds of the forest. "Eleanor, I think you sent him to me," Samuel whispered to the stars. "I think you knew I needed saving just as much as he did." For the first time since his wife's death, Samuel Whitehorse felt truly alive. The 3rd week of their unlikely partnership brought revelations that would have amazed wildlife researchers across the country. Dakota's learning capacity seemed to accelerate daily, absorbing new concepts with the eagerness of a gifted child. By morning, Samuel would demonstrate a simple task, opening the honey jar, turning on the outdoor faucet, even operating the hand crank radio, and by evening Dakota would perform the same action independently. The fishing lessons proved most remarkable. Samuel had initially intended only to show Dakota where food could be found in the wild, but the young bear approached these sessions with startling focus. Within days, Dakota was successfully catching small trout in the shallow pools near the cabin, carefully bringing each fish to Samuel as if seeking approval before consuming it. The pride in Dakota's intelligent eyes during these moments reminded Samuel of Eleanor's excitement when her rehabilitated animals achieved new milestones. Their daily routine had evolved into something beautiful and healing for both outcasts. Mornings began with breakfast on the cabin's front porch, Samuel sipping coffee while Dakota munched berries and honey. They would spend afternoons exploring the forest, with Dakota gradually learning to identify edible plants under Samuel's patient guidance. Evenings found them back on the porch, Samuel reading aloud from Eleanor's nature journals, while Dakota listened with an attention span that defied everything Samuel knew about bear behavior. But their peaceful existence was about to face its first serious threat. On August 29th, Samuel's neighbor Jenny Clearwater stopped by unexpectedly to deliver mail that had been misdelivered to her ranch. Jenny, a photography enthusiast, had brought her camera to document some unusual wildflowers she'd spotted along the road. As Samuel chatted with her on the porch, Dakota emerged from the cabin's interior where he'd been napping. Jenny's sharp intake of breath and the rapid clicking of her camera shutter made Samuel's blood run cold. Before he could react, she'd captured several high-resolution images of Dakota investigating her pickup truck with obvious curiosity. The bear's star-shaped chest marking was clearly visible, along with his remarkable calm demeanor around humans. "Samuel, that's incredible," Jenny breathed, lowering her camera. "I've never seen anything like this. How long have you been caring for him?" Samuel's mind raced through possible explanations, none of them satisfying. "It's complicated, Jenny. Please don't. This is amazing. People need to see this. The bond you two have developed, it's like something from a nature documentary." That evening, despite Samuel's desperate pleas for discretion, Jenny posted 3 photographs on her Facebook page with the caption, "Local hero Samuel Whitehorse has rescued an orphaned bear cub. Look at this incredible friendship. Yellowstone, wildlife, #bear rescue. Local heroes." Within hours, the images had been shared hundreds of times across social media platforms. Samuel watched the digital wildfire spread with growing horror. Comments poured in from well-meaning animal lovers, wildlife photographers seeking permission to visit, and inevitably, government officials questioning the legality of his situation. Park Service colleagues began calling, their voices carefully neutral as they inquired about his visitor. Samuel deflected as best he could, but he knew their sanctuary's days were numbered. September brought an illusion of normalcy that Samuel treasured while dreading its inevitable end. Dakota had grown significantly, now weighing close to 60 pounds and displaying the confident movements of a healthy adolescent bear. His coat had regained its lustrous black sheen, and the infected bullet wound had healed completely, leaving only a thin scar that Samuel's fingers found during their evening grooming sessions. The bear's emotional intelligence continued to astound Samuel daily. When the old ranger experienced bad days, mornings when Eleanor's absence felt particularly crushing, Dakota seemed to sense his mood instinctively. On these occasions, the bear would bring small gifts, perfectly round stones from the creek, wildflowers carefully carried without damaging their petals, or interesting pieces of driftwood arranged with what could only be described as artistic intention. Their communication had evolved beyond simple commands into something approaching conversation. Dakota had learned to express hunger by tapping his food bowl, thirst by sitting beside the water spigot, and a desire for outdoor exploration by bringing Samuel his hiking boots. Most remarkably, the bear had developed a way to request evening story time by carrying one of Eleanor's nature journals to Samuel's chair, but shadows were gathering around their peaceful existence. Samuel began noticing subtle signs that someone was watching them: disturbed vegetation near the property line, unusual tire tracks on the access road, and most unsettling, the feeling of being observed during their forest walks. His ranger instincts, honed by decades of wilderness experience, screamed warnings that he couldn't ignore. October arrived with a financial crisis that threatened to destroy everything Samuel had built with Dakota. A certified letter from the Medical Collection Agency delivered an ultimatum. Pay Eleanor's outstanding treatment bills, now ballooned to $87,000 with interest and penalties, within 30 days, or face immediate foreclosure proceedings on the cabin and property. Samuel stared at the impossible figures until his eyes blurred with tears. His monthly pension barely covered basic living expenses, and the property taxes alone consumed nearly half his income. The thought of losing the cabin, the physical manifestation of his life with Eleanor, felt like facing her death all over again. That night, alone in his bedroom while Dakota slept peacefully in the living room, Samuel found himself researching something that made his stomach churn with self-loathing. Bear bile commanded astronomical prices in illegal international markets. $40,000 per kilogram, according to the underground websites he discovered. Dakota, now healthy and substantial, could theoretically provide enough to solve Samuel's financial crisis completely. The thought lasted less than 5 minutes before Samuel deleted his browser history and scrubbed his hands as if they were contaminated. The fact that he'd even considered such betrayal filled him with shame that kept him awake until dawn. When Dakota greeted him the next morning with his usual affectionate head bump and trusting eyes, Samuel nearly broke down with guilt. Unknown to Samuel, his online searches had attracted the attention of someone who made his living exploiting such desperation. Marcus Ironcloud had built a thriving business connecting financially desperate individuals with the lucrative illegal wildlife trade. His network of informants monitored everything from social media posts to internet search patterns, always seeking new opportunities. Marcus's own story was written in grief and twisted by years of unprocessed trauma. 5 years earlier, his 8-year-old son Tommy had been killed during a family camping trip when a mother black bear, protecting her cubs from what she perceived as a threat, attacked the boy with fatal results. The official investigation ruled it a tragic accident. No negligence, no criminal behavior, just the intersection of human activity and wild animal instinct in its most devastating form. But Marcus couldn't accept that explanation. In his anguished mind, every bear represented the creature that had torn his world apart. He'd started hunting them illegally within months of Tommy's funeral, initially seeking nothing more than vengeance. When associates in Chicago's underground markets introduced him to the profitable world of wildlife trafficking, Marcus discovered he could fund his obsession while feeling justified in his actions. By October 15th, Marcus had been surveilling Samuel's property for nearly a week. Trail cameras hidden throughout the forest had captured dozens of images of Dakota, confirming both the bear's remarkable size and his unusual intelligence. More importantly, they documented the deep emotional bond between man and animal, a connection that would make separation particularly cruel and therefore particularly satisfying to someone driven by his own unhealed wounds. Marcus's research had revealed Samuel's financial desperation, his wife's recent death, and his complete isolation from family or close friends. The old ranger was perfectly positioned for manipulation. Emotionally vulnerable, financially desperate, and legally compromised by harboring an unlicensed wild animal. Marcus had worked similar situations before, but none with such promising potential. The confrontation began on October 16th at dawn. Samuel discovered the first trail camera while checking his perimeter during the morning walk with Dakota. The sophisticated device, mounted 15 feet up a pine tree, had been positioned to capture the cabin's front entrance and the path leading to their favorite fishing spot. Samuel's military training from decades past kicked in as he methodically searched the surrounding area, discovering 2 additional cameras and what appeared to be recent observation posts. Someone had been watching them for days, possibly weeks. The professional quality of the surveillance equipment suggested this wasn't casual interest from wildlife enthusiasts or even routine monitoring by park officials. This felt predatory, dangerous, and specifically focused on Dakota. Samuel spent the afternoon systematically removing every piece of surveillance equipment he could find, but the violation of their sanctuary's safety felt complete and irreversible. That evening, as he and Dakota sat on the porch watching sunset paint the mountains in brilliant orange and gold, Samuel made a decision that terrified him with its finality. "Tomorrow we're going deep into the park," he told Dakota, stroking the bear's thick fur with trembling hands. "Someone's hunting you, and I won't let that happen. Eleanor would never forgive me if I failed to protect you." Dakota seemed to sense the gravity in Samuel's voice. The bear moved closer, resting his massive head against the old man's knee with a trust that made Samuel's heart ache. Whatever was coming, they would face it together. Neither of them noticed the figure watching from the tree line or the telephoto lens capturing their every movement in the gathering darkness. Dawn came gray and threatening on October 17th, with heavy clouds promising the season's first serious snowfall. Samuel had spent a sleepless night preparing for what felt like a final journey into Yellowstone's wilderness. His military surplus backpack contained enough supplies for 3 days, though he privately doubted they would survive that long once their pursuer made his move. Dakota sensed the tension immediately, pacing restlessly around the cabin while Samuel gathered emergency supplies. The bear's intelligent eyes tracked every movement, and when Samuel pulled on his heavy hiking boots, Dakota immediately retrieved his own traveling signal, a red bandana Eleanor had used to mark animals ready for release back to the wild. At 6:30, they set out through the morning mist toward the deep wilderness areas where tourists rarely ventured. Samuel's plan was simple: reach the remote ranger station at Thoroughfare Creek, 8 miles into the park's most isolated section, and radio for help from federal authorities who might protect Dakota from whatever illegal operation was hunting him. But they were being watched. Marcus Ironcloud had anticipated this exact strategy, positioning himself and 2 associates along the most likely escape routes. Using military-grade GPS tracking devices hidden in the surveillance equipment Samuel had removed, Marcus knew their precise direction of travel within the first hour. The pursuit began subtly. Samuel, despite his age and civilian status, retained the woodcraft skills that had made him legendary among Yellowstone's Ranger Corps. He noticed the first signs around mile 3. Broken twigs at an unnatural angle, a boot print in soft earth that was too fresh for casual hikers, and most tellingly, the absolute silence of birds in an area that should have been alive with morning activity. "We're being followed," Samuel whispered to Dakota as they paused beside a mountain stream. The bear's ears swiveled backward, confirming what Samuel's instincts had already detected. Someone was approximately half a mile behind them, moving with professional stealth but unable to completely mask their presence from Samuel's experienced senses. The old ranger faced an impossible decision. Continuing toward the ranger station meant leading their hunters directly to the one place where help might be available. But attempting to evade pursuit in the wilderness put both him and Dakota at severe disadvantage against younger, better-equipped opponents. Samuel chose the third option: confrontation on ground of his choosing. Leading Dakota to a defensive position among the granite outcroppings near Cascade Falls, Samuel settled in to wait for whatever was coming. The location offered excellent visibility in all directions, multiple escape routes, and most importantly, the psychological advantage of forcing his pursuers to approach across open ground. They didn't wait long. At 10:15, 3 figures emerged from the tree line approximately 200 yards below their position. Even at that distance, Samuel could see they carried tranquilizer weapons rather than traditional firearms, confirmation that Dakota was their primary target and they wanted him alive. The lead figure cupped his hands and called out across the valley, "Mr. Whitehorse, my name is Marcus Ironcloud. I just want to talk." Samuel's blood ran cold at the name. He knew that surname from tribal council meetings, remembered hearing about a family tragedy several years back involving a bear attack. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. This wasn't just about money or illegal hunting. This was personal vengeance disguised as business opportunity. "There's nothing to discuss," Samuel shouted back, his voice echoing off the granite walls. "Leave us alone." Marcus began climbing toward their position, his movements careful but determined. "I think there is, old man. I know about your financial troubles. I know about your wife's medical bills. I'm here to offer you a solution." The conversation that followed would haunt Samuel for the rest of his life. As Marcus drew close enough for normal speech, Samuel could see the man clearly, mid-40s, physically powerful, with the weathered features of someone who spent his life outdoors. But his eyes held a deadness that Samuel recognized from his own mirror during the darkest days after Eleanor's death. "My son was 8 years old when your kind of friend killed him," Marcus said, his voice steady but trembling with barely controlled emotion. "Tommy Ironcloud. Look it up when you get home, if you get home. He was camping with his uncle, just being a normal kid, when a mother bear decided he was a threat to her cubs." Samuel felt his heart sink as he realized the tragedy that had created this moment. "I'm sorry for your loss," he said quietly. "But Dakota isn't responsible for what happened to your son. He's just a baby who lost his own mother." Marcus laughed bitterly. "You think I don't know about his mother? I killed her myself 3 months ago. She was teaching this 1 and 2 siblings how to hunt in areas too close to human trails. Standard management practice. Eliminate the problem before it becomes a tragedy." The revelation hit Samuel like a physical blow. Dakota, who had been sitting quietly beside him, suddenly raised his head and sniffed the air with intense concentration. The bear's entire body went rigid, and a low growl rumbled from his chest, the first truly aggressive sound Samuel had ever heard him make. "He remembers you?" Samuel said, watching Dakota's reaction with growing amazement. "He recognizes your scent." Marcus's confident expression faltered slightly. "Animals don't have that kind of memory. You're anthropomorphizing basic survival instincts." But Dakota's behavior suggested otherwise. The bear stood slowly, his massive frame reaching its full height as he stared down at the man who had destroyed his family. There was intelligence in those dark eyes, and something that looked remarkably like controlled fury. "Here's my offer," Marcus continued, trying to regain psychological control of the situation. "I'll pay you $50,000 for that bear. Cash, no questions asked, no paperwork. Enough to save your cabin and start fresh somewhere else." Samuel's financial desperation warred with his moral compass. $50,000 would solve his immediate crisis and provide security for his remaining years. But looking at Dakota, who had brought joy back into his life, who trusted him completely, who had become the family he thought he'd lost forever, Samuel knew there was only one possible answer. "Go to hell," he said quietly. Marcus's facade of reasonableness cracked completely. "Then you'll both die out here. My associates are positioned at every exit route. You're 67 years old with a heart condition, carrying a 40-pound pack in wilderness that would challenge men half your age. How long do you think you can run?" The standoff stretched through the afternoon, with Marcus's team maintaining their perimeter while Samuel and Dakota remained in their defensive position. As evening approached, the temperature began dropping rapidly, and the promised snow started falling in earnest. Samuel's arthritis flared with each degree the mercury fell, and he knew his physical limitations would soon force a resolution. At 7:30, as darkness gathered among the granite peaks, Marcus made his final approach. But he came alone, leaving his tranquilizer weapon behind in what appeared to be a gesture of good faith. Samuel kept his hunting knife ready but allowed the conversation to continue. "Last chance, old man," Marcus said, his breath visible in the cold air. "That bear represents a fortune in the right markets. Asian medicine, private collectors, research facilities. I have buyers who'll pay premium prices for an animal with his unique characteristics." Samuel looked at Dakota, who had remained calm throughout the confrontation, but alert to every nuance of the threatening situation. The bear's trust in Samuel's protection was absolute, heartbreaking in its innocence. "My wife spent her life saving animals like him," Samuel said finally. "She'd roll over in her grave if I sold him to monsters like you." "The answer is no, and it'll always be no." Marcus nodded slowly, as if he'd expected this response. "Then you've made your choice. We'll take him anyway, and you can explain to the coroner how a 67-year-old man thought he could stop 3 professionals with military training." He turned to leave, then paused for one final comment that chilled Samuel to the bone. "By the way, your cabin's going to have a little accident tonight. Gas leak, probably. These old places, they go up so fast. All those memories you and Eleanor built, gone in minutes." As Marcus disappeared into the gathering darkness, Samuel realized their situation had become hopeless. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and trapped in increasingly dangerous weather conditions. His phone had no signal, his emergency radio couldn't reach the nearest ranger station, and his aging body was already feeling the effects of exposure and stress. But looking at Dakota, who pressed close to share warmth as the snow began falling harder, Samuel felt something he hadn't experienced since Eleanor's death: the absolute certainty that some things were worth dying for. The final battle was about to begin. The snow fell with increasing fury as darkness consumed the wilderness around Cascade Falls. Samuel's hands shook uncontrollably as he tried to maintain his grip on the hunting knife, though whether from cold, fear, or his worsening arthritis, he couldn't determine. Dakota pressed against his side, the bear's warmth the only thing preventing hypothermia from claiming them both in the sub-freezing temperatures. At 9:45, Marcus's assault began in earnest. The first tranquilizer dart whistled past Samuel's ear, embedding itself in the granite wall behind him with a metallic clang that echoed through the narrow canyon. Dakota immediately understood the threat, positioning himself protectively in front of Samuel despite having no comprehension of projectile weapons. "Give up, old man," Marcus's voice carried clearly through the thin mountain air. "You're only making this harder on yourself." Samuel's military training from decades past kicked in as he assessed their tactical situation. 3 armed opponents held superior position and equipment, while he and Dakota were trapped against the canyon wall with limited ammunition. Just the single knife and whatever rocks he could throw accurately. Their only advantage lay in Dakota's unpredictable nature and the emotional bond that might inspire desperate courage. The second dart caught Dakota in the shoulder, but the bear's substantial body mass and winter fat layer meant the tranquilizer would take several minutes to take effect. More importantly, the pain and confusion caused by the chemical injection transformed Dakota from a peaceful companion into something far more dangerous: a wild animal protecting his family. Samuel watched in amazement as Dakota charged down the rocky slope toward Marcus's position, moving with a speed and agility that belied his substantial size. The bear's intelligence showed clearly in his tactical approach. Instead of running directly at the armed men, Dakota circled to attack from their blind side, using natural cover to mask his approach until the final moment. Marcus's startled shout of "Shoot him! Shoot him now!" was followed by the sounds of men scrambling for position among the rocks. But Dakota had already closed the distance, his massive paw sending one of Marcus's associates tumbling down the granite face with a scream that cut through the night air. Samuel forced his aching body into motion, following Dakota's assault with his own desperate charge. His arthritic knees screamed in protest as he half ran, half fell down the treacherous slope, but adrenaline and protective fury drove him forward. For the first time in 3 years, Samuel Whitehorse felt truly alive, not because he was winning, but because he was fighting for something that mattered more than his own survival. The battle became a chaotic melee in near total darkness. Marcus had expected to face one elderly man and a tranquilized bear, not a coordinated defense by two desperate creatures who refused to be separated. His remaining associate panicked when Dakota's claws raked across his thigh, abandoning his tranquilizer weapon to flee into the forest, screaming about that monster bear. But the chemicals were taking their effect. Dakota's movements became sluggish, his coordination failing as the powerful sedatives coursed through his bloodstream. Samuel watched in horror as the bear stumbled, then collapsed onto his side in the snow, his breathing becoming shallow and irregular. "It's over," Marcus panted, blood streaming from scratches on his face where Dakota's claws had found their mark. "He'll be unconscious for 6 hours. Plenty of time to get him secured and transported." Samuel knelt beside Dakota's motionless form, his heart breaking as he felt the bear's pulse growing weaker. "You bastard! You've killed him with that overdose!" Marcus laughed bitterly, checking his own wounds while keeping his tranquilizer gun trained on Samuel. "Bears are tougher than you think. He'll survive the trip to Chicago where my buyers are waiting. They prefer their subjects alive for organ harvesting, fresher product, better prices." The casual cruelty of Marcus's words ignited something primal in Samuel's chest. This wasn't just about money or even revenge anymore. This was about the systematic destruction of innocence by men who had lost their own humanity to grief and greed. "You want to know about my son?" Marcus continued, his voice taking on a manic quality as he prepared restraints for Dakota's unconscious form. "Tommy was afraid of dogs, wouldn't hurt a spider, cried when his goldfish died, and that bitch bear tore him apart like he was nothing, like he didn't matter, like his life had no value." Samuel felt his own grief rising to meet Marcus's pain. "And what do you think Eleanor would say about this? My wife, who dedicated her life to healing wounded animals, you think destroying Dakota brings Tommy back?" "Your wife was a fool," Marcus spat, kneeling to check Dakota's pulse, "wasting her life on creatures that would kill her without hesitation if they got the chance. At least now her money troubles die with her." The mention of Eleanor, the suggestion that her life's work had been meaningless, pushed Samuel beyond rational thought. With strength born of desperate fury, he lunged at Marcus, his hunting knife aimed at the younger man's throat, but age and arthritis betrayed him at the crucial moment. His legs buckled, sending him sprawling face first into the rocky ground. Marcus easily sidestepped the clumsy attack, then kicked Samuel viciously in the ribs, sending fresh agony through the old ranger's already stressed body. Pathetic. You can't even die with dignity. As Samuel lay gasping in the snow, feeling his ribs grinding against each other with each painful breath, Marcus returned his attention to Dakota's unconscious form. "Help me get him into the transport cage," he called to his remaining associate, who emerged cautiously from behind a boulder. "I want to be off this mountain before dawn." But as they struggled to lift Dakota's dead weight, Samuel noticed something that gave him one final surge of desperate hope. The bear's eyes had opened slightly, and though his body remained limp from the tranquilizers, those intelligent dark orbs tracked the movements of his captors with unmistakable awareness. Dakota was playing possum, somehow fighting off the sedatives through sheer force of will and animal cunning. Samuel had seen Eleanor's rehabilitation subjects do this before, feigning unconsciousness while calculating their chances for escape. But never had he witnessed such sophisticated deception from such a young animal. The betrayal came with brutal swiftness. As Marcus and his associate bent over Dakota's apparently helpless form, The bear exploded into action with the last of his strength. His massive paw caught Marcus across the face with enough force to send the man flying backward into the granite wall, where his skull connected with stone with a sickening crack. Marcus crumpled to the ground, his tranquilizer gun clattering across the rocks as blood pooled beneath his head. His associate took one look at Dakota's fury-filled eyes and sprinted into the darkness, abandoning his employer to whatever fate awaited him. Samuel crawled painfully to where Marcus lay motionless, checking for vital signs with trembling fingers. The man was still breathing, but barely, his pulse weak and irregular. A massive head wound leaked blood into the snow, creating a spreading crimson stain that looked black in the moonlight. Dakota, exhausted by his final effort, collapsed again beside Samuel, his breathing labored but determined. The bear nuzzled Samuel's hand with his nose as if seeking reassurance that their ordeal was finally over. But their triumph felt hollow as Samuel looked around at the devastation. Marcus lay dying in the snow, another father destroyed by a cycle of violence that seemed impossible to break. Samuel's own body was failing, his ribs probably broken, his heart struggling with dangerous arrhythmia brought on by stress and exertion. Most devastating of all, Samuel realized that even if they survived this night, their sanctuary was truly lost forever. Marcus's threats about the cabin hadn't been idle. Smoke was already visible against the star-filled sky in the direction of home, suggesting that his associates had carried out their arson plan as promised. Eleanor's garden, her rehabilitation equipment, their 35 years of shared memories, all reduced to ash while Samuel fought desperately to save the last creature his wife would ever help him heal. As hypothermia began claiming his consciousness, Samuel wrapped his arms around Dakota's unconscious form and whispered the words that Eleanor had said to him during her final moments. "It's okay to let go now. We did our best." The snow continued falling, slowly burying two friends who had found each other too late and lost each other too soon. Dawn came with the mechanical thunder of helicopters cutting through the mountain air. Samuel drifted in and out of consciousness as the rescue teams worked frantically to stabilize both him and Dakota in the pre-dawn darkness. The emergency radio in his backpack, damaged during the fight but still functional, had somehow transmitted their GPS coordinates to Yellowstone's dispatch center during the night. The first paramedic to reach them was a young Crow woman named Sarah Kills Enemy, whose grandmother had worked alongside Eleanor in the early wildlife rehabilitation programs. Sarah's hands moved with professional efficiency as she assessed Samuel's injuries: 3 broken ribs, severe hypothermia, and dangerous cardiac arrhythmia that required immediate medical intervention. "Sir, can you hear me?" Sarah's voice seemed to come from underwater as Samuel fought to focus his eyes. "We're going to get you both out of here." "Your bear friend is still breathing. That's a tough animal you've got there." The helicopter ride to Billings remained a blur of pain medication and worried voices. Samuel's last clear memory before losing consciousness was the sight of Dakota, intubated and connected to veterinary life support equipment, being transferred to a specialized wildlife medical facility in Bozeman. The bear's eyes were closed, but his massive chest rose and fell with mechanical precision. Samuel awoke 3 days later in the cardiac intensive care unit, surrounded by faces he didn't immediately recognize. A serious-looking woman in a federal law enforcement uniform introduced herself as Special Agent Jennifer Crow Dog from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Her presence meant his situation had attracted attention far beyond local park authorities. "Mr. Whitehorse, you're in serious legal trouble," Agent Crow Dog began, without preamble. "Harboring an unlicensed wild animal, interfering with federal wildlife management, failure to report a wildlife crime, the charges could put you in federal prison for 5 years." But as Samuel's head cleared, Agent Crow Dog's expression softened slightly. "However, your statement about Marcus Ironcloud and his trafficking network has opened an investigation we've been pursuing for 3 years. If you're willing to cooperate fully, we might be able to work something out." The investigation that followed revealed a criminal enterprise far more extensive than Samuel had imagined. Marcus's operation had trafficked over 200 protected animals across 6 states, supplying everything from bear bile to exotic pets for wealthy collectors. Financial records seized from his associates showed gross revenues exceeding $2 million annually. More shocking was the discovery of Marcus's personal journals found in his truck after his arrest. The entries revealed a man consumed by grief who had twisted his son's death into justification for systematic cruelty. One passage particularly haunted Samuel. "Tommy would have hated what I've become, but I can't stop. Every bear I kill brings me closer to the one that took him, even though I know that bitch died years ago." The truth about Dakota's mother emerged through forensic evidence that made Samuel's blood boil with fresh rage. Marcus hadn't killed her during any management operation. He had been illegally hunting in Yellowstone's protected areas, using high-powered rifles and professional tracking equipment to target breeding females. Dakota's mother had been shot while foraging peacefully near a stream, her only crime being in the wrong place when a damaged man needed to feed his obsession. But the most devastating revelation came from the medical team treating Dakota at the wildlife facility. Dr. Rachel Spotted Horse, the facility's chief veterinarian, delivered news that shattered Samuel's heart more completely than Marcus's physical assault ever could. The tranquilizer dosage was calculated for an adult male bear, Dr. Spotted Horse explained gently. Dakota received nearly 3 times the safe amount for his body weight. "We've managed to stabilize his vital functions, but there's been significant neurological damage. He may never regain full cognitive function." Samuel stared at the unconscious bear through the viewing window, watching machines monitor every breath and heartbeat. The vibrant, intelligent animal who had brought joy back into his life lay motionless, possibly forever changed by human cruelty. The irony was crushing. They had survived Marcus's attack only to lose each other to its aftermath. The legal proceedings moved with surprising speed, aided by overwhelming evidence and Marcus's eventual cooperation. Facing life imprisonment, Marcus had agreed to provide testimony against his entire network in exchange for a reduced sentence. His confession included details about dozens of other victims, including a family of wolves killed for their pelts and several endangered lynx sold to private collectors. During one particularly difficult court session, Marcus addressed Samuel directly for the first time since their confrontation in the wilderness. "I know you hate me," he said, his voice broken by months of psychiatric treatment in federal custody. "But I need you to understand. I wasn't trying to hurt you personally. I just couldn't stop seeing Tommy's face every time I looked at that bear." Samuel studied the broken man before him, seeing not the monster who had terrorized them in the mountains, but a father destroyed by unprocessed grief. "You think I don't understand loss?" Samuel replied quietly. "I buried my wife 3 years ago. Cancer ate her alive while I watched helplessly. But I didn't turn that pain into an excuse to hurt innocent creatures." The exchange led to an unexpected development that would reshape both their futures. Marcus's court-appointed psychiatrist, Dr. Michael Black Elk, suggested a restorative justice approach that focused on healing rather than pure punishment. Samuel initially resisted any program that might reduce Marcus's sentence, but Dr. Black Elk's proposal intrigued him despite his anger. "Traditional Lakota justice focuses on restoring balance to the community," Dr. Black Elk explained. "Marcus has acknowledged his crimes and expressed genuine remorse. Rather than simply warehousing him in federal prison, what if his sentence included meaningful work toward conservation and wildlife protection?" The program that emerged became a model for similar cases across the country. Marcus would serve 15 years in federal custody, but 10 of those years would be spent in a minimum security facility where he would help operate a wildlife rehabilitation center. His expertise in tracking and wilderness survival, previously used for destruction, would be redirected toward protecting the species he had once hunted. Meanwhile, Dakota's recovery progressed more slowly than anyone had hoped. The neurological damage proved permanent but less severe than initially feared. The bear retained his basic intelligence and most of his personality, but his short-term memory had been significantly impacted. He would require lifetime care in a controlled environment, unable to survive independently in the wild. The solution came from an unexpected source. Eleanor's old wildlife rehabilitation license, dormant since her death, could be reactivated under Samuel's name with proper federal oversight. The cabin that Marcus's associates had attempted to burn had suffered only minor damage. Apparently, the arson attempt had been interrupted by the arrival of park rangers responding to the emergency call. More incredibly, Eleanor had maintained a secret savings account specifically designated for wildlife emergencies. Her final bank statements, discovered among her personal papers, showed she had been quietly setting aside money for years, perhaps anticipating exactly this kind of situation. The account contained enough funds to establish a proper wildlife sanctuary with veterinary facilities and educational programs. But the most shocking revelation came from Eleanor's personal journals, found intact in the cabin's basement safe. Entries dating back 5 years described her growing concern about illegal wildlife trafficking in the Yellowstone ecosystem. She had been documenting suspicious activities, photographing unusual vehicle traffic, and even attempting to track radio frequencies used by poachers. One entry, dated just 3 months before her cancer diagnosis, proved particularly revealing. "I've identified at least 3 organized groups operating in our area. Sam doesn't know. I don't want to worry him unnecessarily, but I've been working with fish and wildlife investigators to gather evidence. If something happens to me, I hope Sam will continue this work. The animals need protection from predators far more dangerous than wolves or bears." Eleanor had been conducting her own investigation of Marcus's network, gathering evidence that proved crucial to the federal case. Her photographs and detailed observations provided the missing links that connected Marcus's local activities to the broader trafficking operation. In death, she had delivered the justice that Samuel couldn't achieve through violence. The realization that Eleanor had been secretly fighting the same battle that nearly cost Samuel and Dakota their lives created a sense of cosmic completion that both thrilled and devastated Samuel. She had known about the threats facing local wildlife, had been working to protect them, and had even prepared financial resources for their care, all while battling the cancer that would ultimately claim her life. Agent Crow Dog delivered this final revelation personally, visiting Samuel in the hospital where he was slowly recovering from his injuries. "Your wife was one of our most valuable confidential informants," she explained. "She provided evidence that led to 17 arrests across 4 states. Eleanor Whitehorse may have saved more wildlife through her intelligence work than through all her rehabilitation efforts combined." The knowledge that Eleanor's legacy included not just healing injured animals but actively fighting those who hurt them gave Samuel a new understanding of his wife's final years. She hadn't just been battling cancer, she had been waging war against the kind of systematic cruelty that had nearly destroyed Dakota. As Samuel prepared for discharge from the hospital, he faced a future radically different from the isolated grief that had defined his previous 3 years. The Eleanor Whitehorse Wildlife Sanctuary would become reality, with Dakota as its first permanent resident and Samuel as its director. Marcus would eventually join their conservation efforts as part of his rehabilitation, creating an unlikely partnership between victim and perpetrator united by shared commitment to wildlife protection. The story that began with one drowning bear had become something much larger, a testament to the power of love to transcend loss, transform hatred into healing, and create legacy from tragedy. Christmas Eve arrived with a gentle snowfall that transformed the Eleanor Whitehorse Wildlife Sanctuary into a winter wonderland that would have taken Eleanor's breath away. Samuel stood on the expanded cabin's front porch, watching Dakota teach 3 orphaned cubs the art of winter foraging in the specially designed habitat enclosures. At 18 months old and weighing nearly 200 pounds, Dakota had grown into a magnificent bear whose intelligence continued to astound wildlife researchers from across the country. The sanctuary had become something beyond Samuel's wildest dreams. Federal funding, combined with Eleanor's secret savings and an outpouring of donations from supporters worldwide, had transformed their modest property into a state-of-the-art facility. The main rehabilitation center could house up to 20 bears at various stages of recovery, while educational programs brought thousands of visitors annually to learn about wildlife conservation. Dakota's role as the sanctuary's ambassador proved invaluable. Despite the neurological damage from Marcus's overdose, the bear retained enough of his extraordinary intelligence to demonstrate complex behaviors for visiting researchers. His ability to solve puzzles, recognize individual humans, and exhibit what could only be described as emotional intelligence had attracted attention from National Geographic, the Smithsonian Institution, and wildlife psychology programs at major universities. But for Samuel, the most precious moments still came during their private time together. Each evening, Dakota would approach the cabin's back porch where Samuel maintained Eleanor's old rocking chair. The bear would gently place his massive head on Samuel's lap while the old ranger read aloud from Eleanor's nature journals, sharing stories of the animals she had helped decades before Dakota's arrival. The success of the sanctuary had brought unexpected recognition. Samuel had been invited to speak at conservation conferences, his story of redemption and resilience inspiring audiences across the country. Publishers competed for rights to his memoir, tentatively titled The Bear Who Saved My Life, with proceeds designated for expanding wildlife protection programs. More personally meaningful was the restoration of Samuel's health. The purposeful activity of managing the sanctuary, combined with Dakota's constant companionship, had reversed many of the physical and mental symptoms that had plagued his grieving years. His memory remained sharp, his arthritis manageable, and his heart, both physically and emotionally, had healed in ways his doctors called miraculous. The most remarkable transformation belonged to Marcus Ironcloud, who had arrived at the sanctuary 6 months earlier to begin the conservation work component of his federal sentence. Initially, Samuel had resisted the idea of working alongside the man who had nearly destroyed everything he loved. But Dr. Black Elk's restorative justice program required both victim and perpetrator to participate willingly, creating an opportunity for healing that transcended traditional punishment. Marcus's first encounter with Dakota since their mountain confrontation had been electric with tension. The bear recognized him immediately, his body language shifting to high alert as suppressed memories of trauma and tranquilizer darts flooded back. But instead of aggression, Dakota displayed something that shocked everyone present: curiosity about the broken man who stood before him with tears streaming down his weathered face. "I'm sorry," Marcus had whispered, approaching Dakota's enclosure with trembling hands. "I'm so sorry for what I did to you and your mother. I was lost in my own pain, but that's no excuse." Dakota had studied Marcus for long minutes before slowly approaching the fence that separated them. In a gesture that brought tears to Samuel's eyes, the bear had gently touched Marcus's outstretched fingers with his nose, Not forgiveness exactly, but acknowledgement of shared suffering and the possibility of healing. The partnership that developed between Samuel and Marcus proved more effective than either man had anticipated. Marcus's intimate knowledge of poaching techniques and trafficking networks made him invaluable in designing anti-poaching strategies. His wilderness skills, previously used for destruction, now served to protect vulnerable wildlife populations throughout the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. Their collaboration had already yielded dramatic results. Working with federal agents, they had identified and disrupted 4 additional trafficking operations, saving countless animals from the fate that had nearly claimed Dakota. Marcus's insider knowledge, combined with Samuel's lifetime of conservation experience, created an investigative team that poachers found nearly impossible to evade. But the real miracle was the healing that occurred between the two men. Their shared grief, Samuel's for Eleanor, Marcus's for Tommy, created an unexpected bridge of understanding. Both had lost the most important relationships in their lives. Both had struggled with purposelessness and rage. Both had found redemption through service to creatures that couldn't protect themselves. On this Christmas Eve, as Samuel prepared for the sanctuary's first annual holiday celebration, he reflected on the journey that had brought them all to this moment. Community members would arrive soon for the evening's festivities, including many of the children from local schools who had participated in the sanctuary's education programs. Dakota seemed to sense the approaching celebration, demonstrating the playful behavior that always emerged when children visited. The bear had learned to perform gentle tricks, standing on hind legs, rolling over, even painting abstract designs with specially designed brushes. All behaviors that delighted young visitors while teaching them about animal intelligence and the importance of wildlife protection. The highlight of every visit came when Dakota would carefully select small gifts for the children. Interesting rocks, perfect pine cones, or carefully arranged bundles of dried wildflowers. These presentations, conducted with ceremonial gravity that suggested Dakota understood their significance, never failed to leave both children and adults speechless with wonder. As the afternoon light began to fade, Samuel made his way to Eleanor's grave, located in a peaceful grove overlooking the main sanctuary grounds. The headstone, carved from local granite, bore the inscription Eleanor had chosen herself. She spoke for those who had no voice. Surrounding the grave, Dakota and other sanctuary residents had contributed their own memorials, stones arranged in precise patterns, flowers replaced seasonally, even small handmade objects that visiting children had left as tributes. "We did it, honey," Samuel whispered, kneeling beside the grave despite his aging knees. "We saved Dakota. We stopped the poachers, and we built something beautiful that will outlast us both. I think you'd be proud of what we've accomplished." The wind through the pine trees seemed to carry Eleanor's voice in response, though Samuel knew it was only his imagination. Or perhaps it wasn't imagination at all. Perhaps love really did transcend death, creating connections that endured beyond physical presence. As if summoned by Samuel's thoughts, Dakota emerged from the tree line carrying something in his mouth. The bear approached Eleanor's grave with the reverent behavior he always displayed in this sacred space, gently depositing his offering at the base of the headstone. It was a perfect red rose, somehow preserved despite the December cold, perhaps from the greenhouse where Eleanor's favorite flowers still bloomed under Marcus's careful tending. The sanctuary's evening celebration proved magical beyond anything Samuel had dared hope. Nearly 200 community members gathered in the main hall, sharing stories of their encounters with sanctuary animals and expressing gratitude for the educational programs that had touched their families. Children who had been afraid of wildlife before visiting the sanctuary now spoke passionately about conservation careers they hoped to pursue. The evening's most moving moment came when 10-year-old Sarah Running Bear, a Crow girl from the local reservation, presented Samuel with a hand-carved wooden bear she had made in art class. "Mr. Whitehorse," she said with impressive poise, "my grandmother says you and Dakota are like the old stories where animals and people were family. She says Dakota chose you to be his human father, and you chose him to be your bear son." Samuel accepted the gift with hands that trembled from emotion rather than age. The child's simple words captured a truth that he had felt but never articulated. Dakota wasn't just a rescued animal or even a beloved companion. He was family in the deepest, most meaningful sense of the word. As the celebration wound down and guests departed into the snowy night, Samuel found himself alone with Dakota on the cabin's back porch. The bear settled beside his chair with the contented sigh that had become their evening ritual, while Samuel reached for Eleanor's final journal, the one she had been writing during her last months of life. "Listen to this, Dakota," Samuel said, opening to a passage he had discovered only recently. "Eleanor wrote this just 3 weeks before she died. I won't be here to see Samuel through his darkest hours, but I have faith that love will find a way to reach him. Perhaps it will come in a form he doesn't expect, maybe even with 4 legs and a generous heart. The animals I've spent my life helping have taught me that love transcends species, transcends death, transcends everything except the willingness to open our hearts to unexpected grace." Dakota's response was to place his massive paw gently on Samuel's arm, a gesture that had become their equivalent of holding hands. In the distance, the aurora borealis began to dance across the star-filled sky, Eleanor's favorite natural phenomenon and her personal sign that all was well in the universe. Samuel Whitehorse, now 68 years old and surrounded by the family he never knew he needed, realized that the greatest love stories aren't always between 2 people. Sometimes they're between broken souls who heal each other across impossible odds, proving that redemption, like love itself, comes in forms we never expect but always deserve. The story that began with one drowning bear had become a legacy of hope that would endure for generations. Sometimes the greatest chapters of our lives begin when we think the story is over. Samuel Whitehorse believed his purpose died with his beloved wife Eleanor, leaving him drowning in loneliness and financial desperation. But when he pulled that bear cub from the icy waters, he discovered something profound. Healing doesn't always come from moving on. Sometimes it comes from moving forward with love we thought we'd lost forever. Dakota didn't replace Eleanor's memory. He honored it by showing Samuel that his capacity for love hadn't died with her. Together, they built something beautiful from the ashes of tragedy, a wildlife sanctuary that now protects hundreds of animals and educates thousands of children about the sacred bond between humans and nature. Their story proves that redemption can emerge from our darkest moments, that broken hearts can still house tremendous courage, and that the family we need most might arrive in the most unexpected forms. When we open ourselves to love again, even after devastating loss, we discover that our greatest contributions to the world often come not from our strength, but from our willingness to be vulnerable enough to care deeply about something beyond ourselves. What unexpected source of healing or purpose has entered your life during a difficult time? Have you ever experienced a moment when helping another living being actually healed something broken inside yourself? Please share your story in the comments below. Your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.